The Committee of the Whole is back in order. I have been reminded that we are now in the 21st century. Like football and baseball, and even soccer, there is instant replay. And the clerk has gone back over the YouTube video and determined that my count on the Revenue and Taxation Amendment was incorrect, that there were only 7 and that motion failed. Yeah, both of those two amendments both failed. So there is no need to go back over them. We can deal with your next amendment. Senator Snickles, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those first 2 amendments actually were necessary in order for us to fund this next amendment, which was an amendment for the Guam Department of Education to be fully funded. Absent the passage of those 2 amendments, the general fund revenues are insufficient for appropriation. The same goes for the amendment for the Guam Fire Department to pay for their trainees. And so in light of that, Mr. Chairman, with the inability to actually free up that revenue of those 2 amendments, I would have to yield to the pleasure of the House at this time, as those were necessary for us to be able to balance the remainder of the amendments that I have to proffer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That would take care of the next 4 amendments. I will now take a short recess. Committee of the Whole is back in order. Senator Nicholas, I understand you wish to have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of this impasse, I would like to, at this time, make a motion for reconsideration by the body for the regarding the proposed amendment on the Department of Revenue and Taxation.
On that motion, is there an objection to reconsideration? I was just wondering, at first, is there an objection to the reconsideration? If not, yes, Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in addition to reconsidering the vote on the Sir Nicholas amendments, I'd like to further move that we vote on it as a package, because really the adoption of the figure and then what follows after that, if one of the allocation proposals does not go through, then right back to the drawing board. So I would move that that we vote on the package, which begins with the adoption of the supplemental appropriations revenue level, and then how the SAR funds are to be allocated, and then the other additional amendments. Now, if given that motion, maybe the body would like 5 minutes to review once more the entire package, and then vote in it as a package.
I will take a short recess, and you can all discuss it amongst yourself how you wish to address this.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a comment first. As I look at the packet, as we're looking at other agencies being reconsidered on the budget, we seem to be missing a branch of government that's not included, even if it requires to be funded by the SAR, and that's the Guam Legislature. As we're looking at from the governor's office and everybody else, and I look at the budget, our body's not even included to be even at least restored and funded by SAR. And I'd like that to be considered by the author of the bill, or do I need to make the amendment to add it?
All right, I'll take another short recess. Please discuss it. Senator Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of some conversations of our colleagues, there is an interest to move these various amendments as a single measure. And so for housekeeping purposes and for a matter of order, I would like to make a number of motions to reverse the actions that we've previously taken in order to consolidate them. And so my first motion, Mr. Chairman, will be a motion for reconsideration of the vote on the Department of Administration. After such time, if that motion is successful, I will withdraw that amendment, Mr. Chairman.
That motion had failed.
It had failed, yes.
And so you're asking for reconsideration to see?
Yes, reconsideration to bring the amendment back to life and then to withdraw it, because as a failed amendment, there may be rules of order issues with respect to introducing the same amendment twice.
All right, fine.
A motion to reconsider the actions of the body on the amendment regarding the Department of Administration, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any objection? Is there any objection to reconsidering the motion on Department of Administration? Hearing no objection.
Motion to withdraw that amendment, Mr. Chairman.
On the motion to withdraw the amendment on the Department of Administration, any objection?
Motion to reconsider the actions of the body with respect to the amendment on the Department of Revenue and Taxation, Mr. Chairman.
Similarly, on the Department of Administration, is there any objection? On the motion to reconsider, is there any objection? Motion reconsidered.
Motion to withdraw that amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Motion to withdraw. Anyone wish to be heard? Any objection?
Motion to reconsider the actions of the body with respect to the amendment regarding the office of the governor.
On that motion. Any objection?
Motion to, sorry, Mr. Chairman, motion to withdraw that amendment.
On the motion to withdraw? Any objection? Anyone wish to speak? Withdrawn.
Motion to reconsider the action of the body with respect to the Supplemental Appropriations Revenue Fund amendment, Mr. Chairman.
On the motion to withdraw the
Motion to reconsider.
On the motion to reconsider. Any objection?
Motion to withdraw that amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Any objection to the motion to withdraw?
Mr. Chairman, we have circulated a packet of amendments that we would like to, at this time, motion as a single amendment. They are separated for the purposes of being able to follow along on particularly where they will be affecting sections within the budget. But we would like to, at this time, proffer this as a single standalone amendment, inclusive of an amendment for the Supplemental Appropriations Revenue Fund, to the Office of the Governor budget, to the Department of Revenue and Taxation budget, to the Department of Administration budget, to the Guam Department of Education budget, to the Guam Fire Department budget, an appropriation for the Guam Retirement Security Plan, the real property tax valuation, and a sum to the Office of the Attorney General for tax collection purposes as a single amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone wish to, do you wish to speak on the amendment?
I yield to any of my colleagues who have any questions or motions at this time.
Senator Argan, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I guess the one question I have is the amendment dealing with the Guam Retirement Security Plan. That is an appropriation from the general fund to fund the retirement security plan, so it's not reflective of the original supplemental appropriations revenue fund. So should the body consider that separate and apart? Or if I can get an explanation as to why that's part of the proposed packet, please, Mr. Speaker.
I'll yield, Mr. Chairman. The Guam Retirement Fund, the Guam Retirement Fund was supposed to fund the retirement security plan and do so with their internal revenue streams that are available, and they theoretically should have done it with factoring out the amounts they put back into the general fund from the reduction in the need for contribution rate. That has not been the case, and so what we've done, and this is actually interwoven in all of the math in all of these amendments is with some of the supplemental appropriations revenue fund money funding some of the agencies like the governor's office, DRT, and DOA, that general fund money that we freed up is being programmed back into the retirement fund for them to meet the Guam Retirement Security Plan mandate. So we are not, this 500,000 is accounted for in the overall singular amendment that makes up the full 11 pages here.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Senator.
Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with this amendment now as a packet, personally for me, it just makes it worse. Because I was open to, as I stated earlier, supporting the use and identification of the SAR, the amount of 18 plus million, which I didn't object to earlier, and to using that as a funding source for at least the governor's office. But now that it's tied into the revenue tax and to DOA, which I consider critical agencies, it really makes it harder for me to support this whole packet. And I do know, Mr. Chair, that this budget, any budget, is really based on projections. But for me, at least, the difference is with the other funds that we have before us. There's a financial model that we have. There's history. There's experience in those funds. The only thing that we have, at least on record, is an audit that was conducted in 2012, I believe, which showed that this fund did not collect what this body had set out for it to collect, and therefore several programs and services were not properly funded. And so that's my fear, Mr. Chairman, is that at least for the two critical agencies, which is Revenue Tax and DOA, who were tasking to go out and collect taxes and to manage our finances, that if things don't pan out, and if we're looking at aggressive collection, if that's what it is that we're banking on, I don't see how in one fiscal year we're able to be successful. At least, I hate to be a pessimist on this, but if we're having the efforts now with a tax amnesty, even having to extend it because we're not collecting what we anticipate, how are we going to collect, after that? And I'm sure there's still going to be, some collectibles out there, but the situations or circumstances from these people may be different. And so for those reasons, Mr. Chair, I object to this amendment.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on the packaged amendment? Madam Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple of things. One is the revaluation. Wait. All right. So Section 8. One of the amendments, one of the last amendments in this packet would appropriate $2.5 million to fund real property tax valuation. So I know that we are behind, but I'm just wondering, what is the expected revenue from a revaluation? Because this was not brought up by revenue and taxation as one of those income ideas. And so I just want to know if, what are we expecting from this? If maybe they didn't ask for this because they're not expecting a big return on it. That's what I'm curious about, Mr. Speaker.
I have no idea.
Would the author yield on that? Does OFB, am I correct in saying that there was no analysis by BBMR or Revenue Tax regarding if we had done a revaluation, what type of income that might bring in?
No. What?
Mr. Chairman, it's a mandate. The revaluation is a mandate. We're actually behind on the revaluation as it is. and it's actually mandated to take place every so many years in order for the property tax rolls to remain updated. When we don't do our revaluations, when we put them off, and valuations accrue, and then we do it at a later date, it has a greater sticker shock to the property owners because it wasn't gradually done as it should have been. Another issue, Mr. Chairman, is that this revaluation is being funded from SAR money, not general fund money. And so if the government collects the amounts necessary to fund the SAR, then it shall be appropriated based on a line item in this packet. But we're not taking any money from the general fund or from any agencies to fund the supplemental appropriations, to fund the revaluation. So there is no adverse impact on the general fund appropriations. That's the logic behind including it. It's a mandate that we're supposed to do. Whether or not it brings in additional revenue, based on my anecdotal conversations with realtors and mortgage loan officers, there has been some appreciation, and any appreciation would also help in the property tax rolls, Mr. Chairman.
Is that satisfactory, Vice Speaker?
I did have a second question, Mr. Speaker, and I guess I understand the mandate. I'm just concerned that, well, my second concern, Mr. Speaker, that I wanted to ask you about is this. So the whole premise of the packet is that it says the Supplemental Appropriations Revenue Fund. This is going to be on page 5 of the bill, which is the revenue section of the bill. It's going to be a line item there showing that we've got this much revenue in this fund. I guess we're all talking about this, that this would be made up of collections in addition to the collections that we've already predicted in the other line items of our revenue projections. And when I'm reading the SAR fund statute, it's not clear that prior year, and now I'm going to call this $73 million of approximate appropriations, I'm going to dub those to be prior year uncollected taxes. And so if these prior year uncollected taxes are collected, I don't see any mechanism that they're going to be put into this fund. So I think there's a gap, Mr. Speaker.
Does the author wish to yield?
Mr. Chairman, in my first term as senator in the 32nd Guam Legislature, I introduced a bill called the Responsible Receivables Fund to create a special fund specifically for receivables. The budget chair at the time, the late Speaker Ben Pangilinan, received this bill as it was referred to his committee, and he educated me that the bill was unnecessary because receivables are supposed to go into the SAR fund. So I'm not quite sure what the gap is that the speaker is referring to, but based on the institutional knowledge of the late speaker, I did not move that bill forward because he assured me as budget chairman that the SAR was sufficient to receive collections/receivables.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just going to point out again that so the SAR statute says the SAR fund shall act as a clearinghouse account for all supplemental revenues and expenditures identified by the government of Guam in any supplemental appropriations act and other acts that contain revenue sources that have not been identified in the General Appropriations Act of each fiscal year. So I think, you know, perhaps this can be overcome, but I still think that there's something in this language that is, it might be confusing on interpretation. That's all I'm trying to say, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, and maybe an amendment to that may be necessary subsequent to this action. Any other questions on Senator Morrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the author We yield. Yeah.
Question, please.
Mr. Chair, since we're addressing this as a one packet, first thing I'd like to understand, should the SAR fund not realize the revenues being presented in this amendment to fund all these agencies, what is the mechanism that will go in place? Who eventually there will be cuts to be made to these agencies? Who would determine that? And I'm just wondering how this will come about. Should, as history has shown us, it has not realized what we've budgeted for.
Do you yield, Senator?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. We covered this earlier in the day. The administration has multiple tools, so as would the 35th Guam Legislature, to address the lack thereof of any collections if it turns out that we're unable to bring in 18 million of a projected 73 million. The governor has transfer authority. They can transfer monies between agencies to make up for the shortfall while they work on collections. The governor also has $6 million in additional compact impact money that they can use to carry over the operations while they work on collections. In the event that you exhaust transfer authority and you exhaust compact impact, taxes could be raised at a later date, additional cuts could be explored, and consolidations could be made of agencies and reorganization. So there's a lot of options on the table still. All of the options that were on the table today will be on the table 6 months from now, Mr. Chairman. But what we're doing is we're saying that of all the information that we've received, the 73 million in taxes that the Revenue Tax Director himself said is collectible, after reconciling down the $190 million figure, $18 million is a fraction of the 73 million, which is a fraction of the 190 million. So if they're still unable to collect that after everybody, coming out and saying that that's going to be the solution to the financial situation, well, we can always go back to the drawing board, the same options that have been on the table at the beginning of the conversation. But what we're doing, Mr. Chairman, is we're allowing for the collections to actually be the funding source, which is what everybody has been crutching on lately. So let's put it into policy, and if it doesn't turn out, there's all these other tools that are available. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And also, Senator, the executive has the prerogative of cash management. So whatever comes in can go to whichever of these are, whoever the governor is, their favorite project, and whichever isn't will wait until the last of the 18 million is collected.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Section 9, this is, I'm not sure of the Guam Retirement Security Plan. This is kind of new to me, Mr. Chair, and I'm not sure if you had a public hearing. Was there a public hearing on this?
Do you wish to yield?
I can, Mr. Chairman. This is an existing mandate, actually. It's already something that's supposed to be funded by the retirement fund. This is just making sure that money gets to that intended purpose. If we don't fund this and the retirement fund does not receive the revenue and use it for that purpose, they actually will be exposing themselves to lawsuits, Mr. Chairman, because the Guam Retirement Security Plan was part of the hybrid that we passed. And from the beginning of January 1st of this year, the Guam Retirement Security Plan was supposed to be the default option for all new hires. Based on my information from the Department of Administration and in conversations with the Guam Retirement Fund, they have not been doing that. And their rationale and what they were saying was that their lawyers said, oh, well, there's no money to do it. Well, if they're putting back contribution rate into the general fund, they're basically saying that they had money and they're not using it for that purpose. And in order to insulate the retirement fund from future lawsuits of any members that might turn back around and say, I was never given my Guam Retirement Security Plan option that I was supposed to under law, we need to make sure that we protect the retirement fund from future lawsuits. So this 500,000 is not, it doesn't need new legislation. It's already an existing mandate that they're supposed to fund this component of their retirement options that they provide to the employees. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Is that sufficient?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the author for answering my questions. Again, Mr. Chair, I go back to my previous statements. I'm concerned how the SAR fund is tied into these agencies and used for operations, to be used for operations. This is very, very new. And I just believe that these agencies, especially the line agencies, should be funded from the general fund. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Estevez?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my colleagues have before them some proposed amendments to the packet before the body. And at this time, I'd like to present it, starting with the first page, which moves to adjust the supplemental or SAR fund from $18,480,075 to $20,631,698, with the intent to adjust appropriation levels based off of a fraction rate to both the Legislature, Guahan, and the Office of the Governor. Mr. Chairman, based on consultation with my colleagues, I believe that compromise is reached on discussions to readjust funding issues with both branches might help to move the STAR Fund and STAR initiative forward. Also, with the justification that we did cut and make the cut in general fund appropriation to both the legislature and the governor's office, and this body did not move to make equal cuts to the judiciary of Guam, the third branch of government. This moves to allow for some equalization. Now, even though the governor has a lot of flexibility in terms of their authority to move money, having availability of funds through compact impact to buffer them, the legislature does not. And even if we were to restore them, we would still be 0.002% of the budget, less than a percentile. And it would have drastic impacts. Now, while I'm not moving to reappropriate that general fund money taken from the legislature, the governor's office, I believe that incentivizing SAR collection and putting some of that back towards these bodies as an incentive, incentivizing the continued collections, if this proves to be successful, would warrant expansion, and I think a cooperative working relationship between the 35th Guam Legislature and whoever the new governor is. And so with that, I'm moving these amendments forward, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, and if you'd like to take them one by one, I'd be fine with that, but I rest on my position and ask my colleagues to please consider these amendments.
Did you want them adopted as a packet or one by one?
I think to keep things clear, and so we're not running into the same issue we were running previously, considering they're all tied together based on a new appropriation or an increased uptick in the SAR fund, I'd like that they're addressed all together. They should also, and I'd like to ask that my colleagues also should have the appropriation 28/100ths of the SAR fund, and that's for OFB. So they should have a total of 4 amendments before them, 4 sheets before them.
I saw Senator Torres's hand go up, then Senator Uggan's hand go up. Senator Torres, do you still wish to have the floor? Any other senator after these two? Senator Torres, and then Senator Uggan, then Senator Morrison.
Mr. Speaker, if the good mover of this amendment may so yield, I'm just trying to reconcile what this will do to the actual appropriation on page 45 of the bill. When we start looking, well, 2 things. One, the mover of the amendment upped the amount of the supplemental appropriations revenue fund by a certain amount, but then in the corresponding allocation of that difference, it became a percentile figure as opposed to appropriating a hard and fast. So my question to the mover of the amendment is, how will this, I guess you're doing a new chapter 5 to this section. So this will just be something that will supplement the budget, it's not intended to replace, correct? The fractional amount is not intended to replace? Is it just a fractional amount of that, the difference between the adjusted amount versus the original amount in the SAR revenue? I'm trying to understand exactly.
Correct.
What this is.
And I thank my colleague for the question. Yes, this fractional amount is based on the reduction that we had agreed upon. But again, I want to reiterate, the reduction was in general fund appropriation, which I'm not intending to put back in. I think that's better utilized in other agencies and for other needs in the government. But considering the potential flex and to allow the flexibility and using it as a percentile basis can recoup that because again, cuts do have an effect on operations. And so in realizing that and speaking with my colleagues, I think the compromise was that if we were to allow for the potential to I guess, not want to say course correct, but I guess to adjust upwards back to what was originally proposed in 323 and doing that through the SAR as opposed to general fund appropriation, I think was a compromise that was reached. Now, the percentile basis, yes, does cover the difference, but I think as a secondary measure based on other appropriations made from the SAR, I think we'd have to consider that the amount proposed in terms of what is fully appropriated at 20 million, I think is not going to be an exact figure based on collections, so that could be potentially upwards. So it is an addition to the appropriation. It exists outside of the appropriation, which is a fixed number. And so again, as an incentive, anything in terms of through cooperative working relationship with the future administration, anything in excess that's collected, a portion of that would go to the legislature and the governor's office to allow them to continue operations. Yes.
But then I would have to disagree with that logic, because I think if the intent is to restore to the levels that we, by previous amendment, decreased it, then simply restore it, I believe. And rather than creating a new section, I'm sorry, rather than creating a new subsection A4, why not just increase or restore the amount in the new line 11 under Supplemental Appropriations Revenue Fund? And the reason that I state that is, while you speak to incentivizing, I think that could work against the government. When you incentivize the one agency that has the power to affect the amount of collections and the appropriation of collections is in other words, you're incentivizing the governor's office to drum up as much money as it can, and as a result of that, and the legislature, and as a result of that, you're going to reward them by giving them all the gain. And the reason I think this is a bad policy is, as we're looking at this whole idea of supplemental appropriation revenues, it's anticipating any collections, perhaps mostly of outstanding amounts due, that were due to a prior fiscal year. Under that scenario, usually when you recoup monies that are non-recurring monies, that are monies from collections past, those monies would be used to either retire owed debt, reduce the deficit, or put in a rainy day fund. It generally isn't. What we're doing now is a very awkward way of appropriating money for a fiscal year. So rather than incentivizing the governor's office and the legislature by saying, or incentivizing the governor and saying, hey, as much as you can collect, you're going to get a guaranteed cut of whatever you do over and above what we've set out in this budget, in this line, in this section, AU supplemental appropriation. Anything above that $20 million, you can fund your office. I would rather have a scheme where that money goes into that SARS account and can be used to address whatever needs are pressing at the time. For example, there might be a need at the hospital or a need at DOE. So, you know, when you incentivize somebody for their gain, I think that incentive works against other agencies that perhaps deserve more money than the governor's office themselves. It can be a dangerous political, it can be dangerous in the sense that, you know, it can be utilized for the governor's office more for themselves than for anybody else. So it's just that. I don't object to restoring the amounts that we had contemplated in the budget, but I would object to incentivizing by guaranteeing a percentage of anything collected above and beyond to go to just the governor's office and just the legislature. And I would say that even if I plan to be governor, I wouldn't want that on myself. I think that that's unfair, an unfair advantage.
Thank you, Senator. Any other Senator Morrison wanted to speak, but Senator Ogden, you had it after Senator Ogden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have to comment that I certainly support the idea of increasing the supplemental appropriations revenue fund level from 18.4 to 20.6, and I did make that particular statement before. And it's also consistent with the actions of a majority of the membership here when in fact we originally considered a proposal to adjust that to a $26 million figure, and it was supported. But I do have concerns with the other three proposals that would adjust and reconsider the decision of this body in terms of the allocation for the governor's office, the legislature, as well as OFB. So I just wanted to state that I certainly support the SAR component, but not the allocation and the readjustment of those three particular areas. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Nicholas, did your hand go up? Senator Morrison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to raise a concern, Mr. Chair, I'm having on how we're just adjusting numbers to the SAR fund to adjust previous decisions made by this body. And I don't know when this is going to stop or where it's going to stop. But, Mr. Chair, I'm just concerned how we just adjust numbers to address these previous decisions. And something has to be made very clear. When we make a decision of this body, that we stand by these decisions and move forward. But we're seeing like we're backtracking and we're using this SAR fund to cover decisions they probably didn't really agree with in the first place. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Torres.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I believe that we are entertaining this as a packet, correct? So
Correct.
If there's an amendment made by the proffer of this amendment to the amendment, it would include the corresponding changes that included the language with percentiles. So what I would like to recommend, Mr. Speaker, is while I do not disagree with restoring the amounts that were reduced in the governor's budget and the legislature's budget, that this number, rather than being reflected in corresponding amendments as a percentile representation, that an actual dollar figure simply be added to, for example, on the office of the governor, added to what would be new line 11 of page 45 under the line item supplemental appropriations revenue fund. I hope that I'm being clear. So my objection was mostly to the percentage and the idea that the amounts collected could be over and above just the recovery amount or the restoration amount. So what I recommend is, can we instead add back the restoration amount to the respective areas in their budget? For example, on the governor's office under page 45, line 11, just add that what is now 4514341 plus 988, et cetera, et cetera.
If I may request a brief recess, Mr. Chairman, I think I may be able to address the members' concerns.
Do you wish to be recognized, or do you wish a break?
1 minute recess, Mr. Chairman.
Recess.
See, this is your amendment.
Committee of the Whole is back in order. Senator Esteves, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there's no objection from my colleagues, I move to withdraw my amendment with the intention of introducing a revised amendment based on consultation with my colleagues to address some of their concerns.
Any objection to the withdrawal of the original amendment proffered by Senator Esteves? If not, you have the floor, Senator Esteves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'd like to move that the amendments be taken as one packet.
Okay.
Thank you. The first page is a move to adjust the SAR fund to $20,631,698. The second, what we've done here, and the change to the other ones, does restore the amounts reduced from the legislature and the governor's office, not in general fund appropriation that was taken away and reappropriated to another priority, but with SAR money. Now, based on concerns from my colleagues, because it was a percentile basis, it would allow access to money on top of what was taken away. And so with that, the change in the amendment is to reflect up to. So starting with the governor's office, the 0.28 of the percentage of the SAR fund is appropriated to, my correction, the 4 8/10% of the SAR fund for the office of the governor is appropriated for operations, but they can only expend and appropriated only up to $988,969, which is the difference of general fund appropriation that was reduced from the governor's budget. The second, Mr. Chairman, is the legislature, which then reflects only up to $1,104,544, which is the difference in reduction general fund appropriation reduced from the legislature and reappropriated. And the third one, Mr. Speaker, is for the Office of Finance and Budget, which reflects and appropriates up to the percentile basis, but a maximum of up to $58,100 to the Office of Finance and Budget.
Thank you very much. Senator Uggan, any other senator after Senator Uggan wish to speak? Senator Uggan, you recognize.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I once again want to reiterate my support of the adjustment upward of the supplemental appropriations revenue figure, but I certainly object to restoring the amounts for the respective entities to reflect the governor's office, Legislature and Guam, and also OFB, primarily because I believe that any budgetary reduction really should start with these three entities. So, Mr. Speaker, I object to the consolidation of the proposals, but specifically what I outlined. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Torres.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to thank the mover of this amendment for making the necessary amendments that'll cap it at the amounts that are solely to restore what we previously reduced. And I think that the fact that it will be the mandate then of those agencies responsible for collecting monies to meet this quota and this goal, there's nothing that more that we can ask of them. I mean, it's a risk on their part, but you know, it will be driven by the need to generate sufficient funds to balance this budget. So I rise in full support of this amendment.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Uggan, was that an opposition to the motion or an objection? Object? Okay. There's been an objection. All those in favor of the Esteves amendment to the San Nicolas amendment, please, or does it all go together at one? No, we have to adopt his first and then adopt the
Mr.
combined.
Speaker, may I ask for a 1-minute recess?
Okay. Committee is back in order. On the Esteves amendment, all those in favor of the Esteves amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes. All right, we're back on the St. Nicholas Amendment as amended by the Esteves Amendment. Anybody else need to be heard, or can we just go to the vote? You wish to close?
Just to request the clerk allow for my previous statements on the previous amendments similar to this to be reflected on in the journal.
Thank you. And so we are on the St. Nicholas Amendment as amended by the Esteves Amendment. There's been an objection. All those in favor of the St. Nicholas Amendment as amended, please indicate.
Mr. Chair, right here. We've changed, under the previous vote, we've changed the figures now of the appropriations to the governor and the legislature. And so those amendments would be added on to these amendments. Because right now, the way the St. Nicholas Amendment reads is that $4.5 million will be out of the Supplemental Appropriation Revenue Fund, and I guess then there's an extra 988, and so the total reflection, I guess, will be in two different numbers, but from the same source.
From the SAR, yes.
A little confusing, but if you feel that everybody's going to understand this move, then okay.
Yeah, the increase, if there's going to be an increase, is going to have to come from the SAR, if and when it's collected. Okay? So on the St. Nicholas Amendment as amended, all those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Why don't we start? Let's recess. I understand some people have something to do. Okay. 10. I'll say 9, and I know. Thank you. All right, I'll try a 10, just so that I can, hopefully you'll prove me wrong. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.